Right. Shotgun? Check. Smoke grenades? Check. Rabid My Little Pony repellent? Double check. It's the 5 games for Doomsday Expeditions. Gathering of Chums 2022. You can talk about mental challenge. You can talk about cognitive satisfaction. You can talk about haptic stimulation. None of these claims for games are wrong. There are so many reasons that we crowd around tables in starkly lit rooms and play with the intellectual machinations of those who express themselves through wood and cards and rules. We can dive into these ideas and become submerged in them. We can breathe underwater. At the end of a game, we break the surface and emerge into a world warmed and invigorated by our tariants in a dominion constructed out of abstract ideas. A world that becomes manifest in serotonin and points. It's part of the reason we keep coming back. There's another reason, though. An overarching reason. An reason. Something baked into those spiral ladders that dwell at the heart of every cell. We wither without it. It is the reason we've been able to wreak the triumph and tragedy of the Holocene. It is the reason I play games, the reason I've continued to play them, the reason I love them. And that is fellowship. Board games demand that we be present. Not through fibre optics, but in a room with other people. They tap into that core principle of being human. Togetherness. On the face of it, they're a rudimentary technology. But that simplicity gives them worth. They are covered in the grubby fingerprints of humanity. Unlike the unfathomable sleekness of silicon speed, they are quantifiable and tangible. They remind us of who we are, and rather than monopolise our attention, they augment it, and through their repeated affirmation of our humanity, they bring us out into the world. They help us to become more ourselves. And they do this by encouraging fellowship. Gathering of Chums is a tiny convention on the Gloucestershire-Herefordshire border run by one of Britain's best game designers that puts fellowship at its core. It is like a distillation of the purpose of gaming, and I'm so glad I went. I went to the first one 5 years ago, which was a celebration of Tony Boydell's half-century roaring at the world. I was delighted to discover that in the 5 years since I've attended, almost nothing has changed. Not all progression is good and not all change is positive. Familiarity and comfort are so vital to orienting yourself in a world that is, at best, indifferent to you. And seeing that the gathering was the same size, held at the same place and expressed the same character was wonderful. Gathering of Chums is an event that reflects its organiser. It is friendly, funny and charmingly parochial. It is a swig of Gaviscon that helps to calm some of the heartburn that wells up whenever I think of the country of my birth these days. Melancholy stalks me wherever I go, but the airport is a particularly melancholy place for me at the moment. At passport control, I take the line to the right marked non-EU. Throughout the travails of daily life, I can forget the 23rd of June 2016. It always rattles around at the back of my head, but rarely roars to the front these days. When I'm confronted with such naked proof of that monstrous decision as the non-EU line, though, those feelings of horror and betrayal rise up again. Not in their raw, rage-inducing form now. They've mellowed into a resigned gloom. A regret felt on behalf of a nation lied to for centuries about its exceptionalism. That vile referendum in 2016 cannot be wholly levelled at the feet of Boris Johnson and his current raft of Eton reprobates playing their latest version of the great game with people's lives. It goes into the heart of nationalistic myth-making and the lies it tells. But more on that later. The copper at the desk addresses me in English and asks me how long I've been in Germany. I answer back, in German, that I live here, and I show my German ID, and he ushers me out onto the tarmac and out of the European Union. Ryanair has fucked me by landing me at Manchester Airport at 12:30 at night. I had a couple waiting for my flight, so I'm muddle-headed and a bit tetchy when I waddle over to the taxi rank. My hotel is 3 miles away, and I'd think about walking if it wasn't next to a dual carriageway with no lighting, but I don't want to start off my trip bleeding in a ditch with a broken pelvis, so I get a taxi. Look, it's 3 miles, and I know they're airport taxis, but it can't be more than 15 quid, right? I mean, if it's fucking 20, I'll be livid. 30 quid, mate. But it's only 3 miles down the road. Yeah, but you see, it's in another town, so we have a surcharge. Now, correct me if things have changed in 3 years since I've been back to this bloody country, but I don't remember armed border patrols that require bribing between towns in the north of England. The taxi driver shrugs his shoulders to say, "Take it or leave it, mate." And like the shriveled up piece of cowardly grape skin that I am, I take it and embark on the most expensive 3 miles I've ever travelled in my life. There's no bastard internet in the hotel, but there is Peroni, so I knock back a couple of bottles of the blandest beer-flavoured pop I've had in a long time and decide to enjoy the trip rather than harping on shit I can't control. In the morning I get up, shower and head to the train station. The ire of my taxi bill is transformed overnight into a story. One I'll deploy over the weekend when conversation is flagging or I want to inspire faux indignation in those around me. The grotty red-bricked suburbs of Manchester melt into gentle English countryside. The sky is like a slate roof and dulls the colours of the fields whizzing past my window, but that doesn't diminish my joy at seeing hills. I live in the northeastern German plains, flat expanses of evergreen trees. I slump back into my chair and dive into the kindly undulations of the Midlands. The Longmynd is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Jagged sandstone blocks carpeted in turf jut into the sky. Scattered houses like pimples dot the hills. Temporary irritations. This area feels ancient. It must have seen so much in its long journey from the equator to this part of North Shropshire. It even got to witness the most insignificant ripple of the human story. Me as a teenager, my mind is catapulted back to the smoke-filled weekends wandering these hills, staying at my friend Martin's house, consoling memories cuddled by the warmth of time. I love these hills. Walking them connects you to a grand past, connects you to a grand story that humanity is such a small part of. These hills rise up in the mind. Parts of the world, such as this, give your insignificant meandering through them some context. You are rooted to something, even if it's only for a flicker, in the greater story of the world. I whiz through them, though. Today isn't the time for retreading old paths. I have other places to be. There is a present to be lived. I say goodbye to the Longmynd and put it back in its home in the whirlpool of my memory. Why on earth would anyone host a thing? It would be fine if it was just a matter of standing by the entrance and smiling as the guests enter. If you decide to organise something like this, you end up becoming a nursemaid to a bunch of adults who should know better. You become a combination of tour guide, counsellor and nurse. You end up fielding 1,000 requests and issues. You find yourself doing favours for slatternly dickheads. One of these that poor old Tony Boydell has to do is take quality time out of his day to pick up some wanker from Berlin from the train station. Bear in mind this is the British countryside where everything is miles away from each other, but with effortless good grace, he takes out the time to meet me at Ledbury and drive me to Newent where the gathering is taking place. It's funny that this part of the world isn't much more than an hour's drive from where I grew up and I know nothing about it. Distance isn't fixed. It's a matter of perspective. Live in Texas and you can drive 100 miles to go to the supermarket. Live in rural England and the people in the town 10 miles away are strange aliens that you should have no truck with. I grew up in a town of 3,000 people called Tenbury Wells, and for the first 15 years of my life, it was my whole world. A week after this, I'll go back there for a visit. I'll walk the old streets again, every step a burst of memory. I'll see that the town has barely changed, the same old picture postcard streets. The people, though, they change. The lines in their faces deepen, their hair gets thinner or greyer, their steps more uncertain. Some of them die and drop off the face of the planet, alive only in the memories of those that knew them, that hated or loved them. To go back to your hometown after so many years is to be slapped in the face by the transience of life. How we flash for a second like a cesium flame and then spend the rest of eternity in blackness. Potentiality or a residue of energy. Some will live on in the cultural consciousness a bit longer, but the gales of time will blast every face on every statue smooth eventually. This stark impermanence is no reason for despair or nihilism, though. It is a call to adventure. We are barely here, so we should grasp the mayfly flicker that we have to live and to do what brings joy, not just to us but to those around us. We should throw off the shackles that the old lie of eternal life has bound us in to live now. Stalking the spirit-haunted streets of the old town pulls me out of the solipsism of the quotidian for a bit. It encourages me to try and live, to be present in the world, because before I've realised it, it'll be over and there'll be nothing left but a couple of old stories about me that will rot in the mouths of those that utter them. This is not a call to remarkable deeds. That isn't possible for most of us. We can, though, make a footprint in the sand before the sea washes it away. Newent is exactly what you think of when you think of an English market town. Centuries-old black and white buildings leaning into narrow streets, all comfortably nestled into the Gloucestershire hills. I've spent so much time in towns like this. Stroll through them on a Sunday and you can be fooled into believing the Victorian whimsy that the tourist boards want you to see. Scratch a millimetre below the surface, though, and you'll find drug use, violence and abuse. The urban idealisation of the rural is a kind of Orientalism, kitting out the humble yeoman with the simple goodness of the savage. The people that inhabit these little country towns, though, are more than capable of the depravities of the city. They just manage to hide them better behind the hills and trees. Tony has started a board game museum. A delightful little room with shelves crammed full of cardboard. Curiosities from over a century of gaming. Each shelf a predella on which an altar to distraction is built. We forget how crucial distraction and entertainment are to our lives. So much of our consideration is bent on them. How we work and save to have the means to distract ourselves, to lift our ravaged minds out of the everyday. Still, it astonishes me how those that help to create that distraction are held in such disregard. We treat writers and performers and creators like appendages to society, simply having a laugh, even though we spend so much of our effort, time and money on the products they produce. These products that are so core to the enjoyment of our sojourn on this bleak little world. Next time you go to the cinema, read a book or sit down to a game, remember that the effort that went into these things is not a lark or a hobby, not just a folly by a bored aristocrat to fill their time. Remember that the palette of your life is broadened into many magical colours by these things, and remember we live in a world where these people need money, not just to survive, but to continue to serve you. Remember that and pay the people who create these things, and never, and I can't stress this enough, never ask them to work for free. Otherwise, these wonderful organs of distraction, these things you focus so much of your time on, will only be created by those who can afford to do it. Then they'll become uniform and bland. They'll reflect the viewpoint of one strata of society, and you'll complain and the quality of your life will be diminished, and all because that you think the arts are a lark. They aren't. They are a reflection of who we are as animals. They are crucial to our conception of ourselves, and they stop us from endless reflection on the abyss. They are integral to humanity and always have been. Lascaux, Altamira and Willendorf prove this. Without art, we are not the animal we claim to be, and you know it in your bones. And so every one of you wants good art, and if you want good art, pay your artists. By the time we arrive, people are already at tables in the museum playing games. They're all full, so I go to the pub and have a couple of pints. I've missed English pubs so much, and it's lovely to breathe in the atmosphere. I wander back and we play a game of Glory to Rome and lament that the bastard thing will never be in print again. It's a game of such startling originality. It refuses to subscribe to the normal tenets of game design. It isn't balanced. There are combinations that will propel a player to victory before the others have barely had a chance to gauge what's going on. It can be broken by the draw of a card, and still, it's a riot every time you play it. Carl Chuddock lives in a design space wholly occupied by himself. It's wonderful to walk around in it. We finish playing and head back over to the pub. The cream of Newent are there, basking in the illicit pleasures of a Friday night in the country. We close down the pub and repair outside to the smoking shed with some take-out beers. Some local lads join us and we have a good chat about life and how much an eighth of weed costs here. One of them offers me a line of Charlie, which I turn down because it's 3 hours and 20 years too late for that kind of thing. Or far too late, we climb the wooden hill to Bedfordshire and hope for sleep, because we have a long day of mental exertion tomorrow. They're called formative years for a reason. Hooks are driven into you when you're young, and these hooks tether you to your place of origin. So many of your traits and ideas, predilections and faults are permanently wedded to the first 20 years of your life. The rest of your life is spent in dialogue with a personality formed at this time. If you never leave, you are asked to converse with this formation a whole lot less than if you do. Live somewhere wholly foreign and you reckon with it every day, and as memory knocks off the rough edges of experience, facets of that formative life start to hold great significance. Walking through gentle, mist-drenched fields, the sound of pointless conversations in richly evocative accents, and food. Live in a foreign country, and so much of those basic foodstuffs aren't available to you, and so much of national character is formed by what goes down your gullet. That will never leave you, no matter where you go, and no matter how long you spend away. I commune with my formative years by having a full English breakfast in a baguette. This is the kind of meal sneered at by sophisticated Europeans, until they have one, of course, and then their eyes widen, and they understand. One bite, and I'm catapulted back to my reckless youth. Sitting in the fairy-light festooned courtyard, I'm a teenager again, walking along the streets of Ludlow, eating my coronary in a bun, and wondering if life will fuck me like so many generations of working-class kids before me. Do you see a pattern here? After the continental shift that was the pandemic, this trip is becoming more of a reckoning with my former self than a couple of days playing games. It makes sense, though. The more of the past that's behind you, the more you have to wallow in, and the more you want to do it. In the sweet pea-scented meadows of the past, we can link our memories into daisy chains until they become constructions that we've built to drown the stresses and the worries of now. The past becomes intoxicating and enticing. It can, if we're not careful, become the soma that bleaches the present into pale uniformity. The past is compelling, whether it be in damp-eyed consolation or bitter regret. Stay too long, and you won't want to leave. And there are things to do here. As I get older, my trips to the past become more frequent, and here in this courtyard, for the time it takes me to eat my calories for the day, I revel. Still, I haven't moved the past wholly yet. I finish my cup of tea and the last bite of my sandwich and head into the museum for a game of Princes of Florence. There is something so gratifying about simple mechanisms deployed in a way that guarantees a flush of wonderful chemicals to sluice across your brain. Princes of Florence is such a simple auction game, but its design pushes you towards the satisfying. This is a game that was made in an era where mechanisms were pulled from the real world and wrangled into a game box. This made games that had conversations with the world around them, and not just with games from the past. Also, a game like Princes of Florence feels like a game with an aspiration, to open up the world of games to all who wish to enter, not through faces on a box or worthy social media posts or social pressure, but through a wonderfully graspable game that promotes deep thought. This is accessibility in gaming. A game that can be wrestled with by all. The neophyte can sit with the veteran and leverage the knowledge they've gleaned simply by inhabiting the planet and pull fun out of these mechanisms. It doesn't matter if they win. They participate in an ancient ritual that marks us out as a unique animal, a universal ritual that can include all of us. Princes of Florence is why games are incalculably valuable. We finish up and walk the 10 minutes down the road to the main venue of the convention, the King's Arms. For most of the weekend, I'll be cocooned in the skittle hall in the back. The skittles pushed to the side so we can set up higgledy-piggledy collections of tables to play games on. Before that, though, let's take you on a tour of the pub. I find it a wonderful endorsement of Britain's unwavering commitment to getting pissed that many of its most prepossessing listed buildings are pubs. The King's Arms is a huge white building on the corner of a street, all Georgian charm with fanciful chimneys poking out of the roof. Go through the front entrance and you're greeted with the low ceilings, red velvet and deep brown wood of a British country pub. The King's Arms is the real thing. None of the flat-packed faux tradition of a Wetherspoon shithole. There is a fire crackling and 2 plush armchairs in front of it waiting for people to plant their ample arses in them. It's midday, and so there are a couple of crack-cheek locals staring into pints of Auburn ale. When I lived in the UK, it was still legal to smoke in pubs, but that has changed in the intervening years, and rather than smell like stale tobacco, the King's Arms reeks of tradition and lack of pretension. Far from the goldfish attention spans of city morons, the King's Arms can do what it has done for years. Serve simple food, simple ales, and the drowsy comfort of a warm seat by the fire. A life could be spent in the armchairs around the fire, gently sozzled, and it would be a life well spent. Alright then, grab a pint and I'll take you through to the back room where it's already active with the cognitive buzz of games. This is part of the reason the Gathering of Chums is so wonderful. This long back room feels like a breezy brand of Britishness that has been frozen in amber. Apart from the clothing, you could believe you were in any era in the last 200 years. Friendly faces and the pleasant distraction of parlour games. This is part of the reason board games have started to appeal so much. They are so willfully anachronistic and offer, for a brief period, to tear us away from the blue light of binary totalitarianism. They're made out of wood and paper and could have been played by our bonnet-donning forebears. They imply a world where we can spend our leisure hours with other people rather than bound to silicon cocoons. Spend a couple of hours in a room like this and you could be convinced that there's hope for us. There isn't, but I'm happy to drape myself in that illusion for a bit. We sit down to a game of War of the Ring, the card game. We manage to persuade Tony to sit down with us, and we begin to play. Tony is really very much like me. He's a reactor, he's an extrapolator, he's also a bit of a catastrophizer. Deal him a shitty hand of cards and he's convinced that the game is shite and the world is against him. War of the Ring is a team game, and in the early rounds, much of the heavy lifting is put onto Craig, Tony's partner. Tony moans and blusters through the early rounds. More than once he accuses me of deploying the rulebook to my own advantage. He snorts and loudly wonders if he'll ever get to do anything. This is exactly what I expected when we sat down, and it's exactly what I wanted, his faux indignance fueling us through the first few rounds of the game. We then settle into the comfortable middle phase with either side exchanging advantage. We end the game with my side 1 point ahead. We begin to pack up when Craig says, "Oh, wait a minute, I didn't use my ring token." You get a point for that, which means it's a draw. None of us know the tie-break rules, so I leaf through the rulebook. In the event of a tie, the shadow wins. Tony explodes in a deluge of victorious expletives. For 5 minutes the room is sweltering in the heat lamp of his triumph. Heads look up from player boards filled with turnips and pumpkins to see Tony yelling invective into my face. There has never been a less gracious winner. It's wonderful. The rest of the afternoon is spent sitting at various tables and wallowing in various states of defeat. There are pints of sweet ale and gallons of laughs and good-natured recrimination. The games themselves barely register. It's the time spent with people that's important. In the early evening, we trek up the hill to the Boydell house, where Karen Boydell has spent all of the afternoon cooking for us. She has opened her home to a group of weirdos and allowed us to avail ourselves of her hospitality and eat her food. The generosity is boundless and to be marvelled at. This is a real home with a real family, and it's something I've always craved. As I get to an age where I feel need and emotion drain out of me, I feel less of the stabbing pain of want, but the life the Boydells have built in this little country town is truly to be envied. We prop ourselves on sofa arms and lean against walls while we eat. I say something about Brexit and eyes become rooted to plates, and food suddenly seems much more interesting. I don't press the point. It seems that we're in the truth and reconciliation phase of this clusterfuck now. Keep your mouth shut about what you voted and move on. It seems the sensible course of action. We waddle back down to the pub for more games and more beer, and before we know it, the day is behind us and we should go to bed. I get up early to watch the Cricket World Cup final. I'm boycotting the Football World Cup because of all the murders, so I have to get my sport fix in somewhere. At 5 to 11, the owner of the pub asks if he can turn the telly over. It's Remembrance Sunday and people want to observe the minute's silence. There is a genuine feeling of reverence as we crowd around the flat-screen telly to participate in this most nationalistic of rituals. I'm struck by the sheer pageantry of the whole thing. This synchronised and abstracted sadness. To a certain strata of society, it is vital that we buy into this, you see. It is so important to them that we believe that the royal family, who gorge like leeches on the toil of millions who barely get to scrape themselves through the week, care. The newly minted king in his unearned uniform solemnly lays a wreath at the cenotaph as his mandarins crawl over books of legislation to ensure he doesn't have to contribute a penny to the common weal, to ensure that leasing laws and right-to-buy options on his property aren't enforced, to ensure that the whole bastard lot of them get to remain the biggest landowners in the country by dint of a particular cock spunking into a particular fanny. This carefully choreographed charade of pity and grief goes on as his subjects crowd food banks and debate whether or not they should freeze or starve to death this winter. It is so important that we believe them, or we might actually check what's going on. It's rituals like Remembrance Sunday, in this olive drab-drenched celebration of jingoism and exceptionalism, that we get to justify the anachronism of the royal family, an institution that allows one of its members to rape and traffic children and get away with it. It is more nefarious than that, though. It is in the figure of the king and the royals that we enshrine the kind of extractive rapaciousness that we should be repulsed by. They ingrain an idea that Britain is unique, that Britain is special. It is this nationally endorsed inward looking that results in aberrations like Brexit, a rejection of fellowship that will harm countless generations to come. There is nothing unique about this windy island in the Atlantic. It is populated by people trying to drag themselves through another day and into the arms of those they love at the end of it. Exactly like those people in Europe who eat different stuff and speak different languages but are just the same. A hand was held out to us on this island and we smacked it away because we don't need shit like cooperation because we have a king. These cynical bastards are leveraging the very real depth of feeling from people like those stood around that flat-screen telly in Gloucestershire to justify their stolen luxury. There is so much I love about the country of my birth, but the royal family is a monstrous carbuncle that should be removed, so we can travel into a future that isn't flags and jokes about oily skin, that isn't faux grief and uniforms, a future that is for all of us, not just a bunch of inbred fools that own half the country. Melancholy hangs over the rest of Sunday as people leave and say their goodbyes. The final days of events like these are always so sad. I never want them to end, and the 2.5 days of Gathering of Chums is much too short a time to be in the company of such wonderful people. Soon it's time for me to go. I'm ferried to the train station and say goodbye that is truly heartfelt. There's next year, but there will come a time when this doesn't happen anymore. A day when we're all gone. The last days of conventions always bring these kinds of thoughts crashing over me. Sometimes I wonder how I got here. A place where I feel so alone. Day after day spent in the purgatory of solitude, skint, looking out over a city that has no regard for an average dickhead like me. I sometimes feel submerged in the indolence of despair, unable to do anything, weighed down by decades of bad decisions, cursed by the moronic idea that I could tear myself away from my sheer averageness, cursed by the idea that I could be happy. I play at life. I don't live it. This is living, though. The old lie that anything we do means anything. Speak to anyone for any length of time and you realise that the whole thing is bloody hard, and the older you get, the harder it gets. Hitting your 40s, single, with no real family to speak of, will put you in rooms alone. Much too much for your liking. In those aching hours of isolation, it's memories that sustain you. Those syrup-coloured moving pictures of better times, all of them flecked with bewitching melancholy, that little drop of pain there to remind you that you can still feel, that you're still here. And I am still here, and I know that there are many more of these days ahead of me, so I need to forge more memories, to paint pictures in my mind that dazzle me with their brilliance. This is what weekends like Gathering of Chums provides. Gathering of Chums is the distillation of why we are so eager to participate in this weird little hobby of ours. There's no financial imperative here, there are no marketing opportunities, there are no collabs. Attend Gathering of Chums and you won't be asked to buy anything, you won't be compelled to do anything you don't want to. You'll be welcomed because the whole weekend is predicated around the idea that we're better together. That sitting around tables and revelling in each other can change the world. You won't be asked to defend your views on whatever transient event is pulling us apart this week. You won't be asked to pledge to a viewpoint or a god. You'll laugh, and you'll be graciously led through a weekend of good-natured camaraderie. We are nothing without others. We are fed by them. And Gathering of Chums is the most healthful of nourishment. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this, you can support the show by going to patreon.com/5G4D.